Welcome to the Nursing Post podcast, All Nursing All the Time with Ashley and Rosa. In this episode, we discuss a couple of articles that we found to be interesting this year. Our goal is always to inform and start conversation.
Looking back on 2021, we were both more optimistic than we were in 2020. We did come a long way this year, but we really have a long way to go, period, in healthcare, in our nation.
Everything.
Yes, the whole shebang.
The whole thing.
But we're looking forward to a bright 2022. So today we have both picked a couple of articles that have stood out to us that we just want to talk about and kind of get some input from other nurses to see what y'all's thoughts are as well.
So one of the first articles, or actually it's an article that I have seen probably since the summer that has continued, I think, each week to compile and compound, and then even to the point to where it's made the evening news quite a bit these last few months. So you'll see a lot of articles, and it's called The Great Resignation. But the reason why we wanted to talk about it is, one, not only does it affect healthcare, because there is a huge impact in healthcare regarding this, but this is the first time where I think we have seen it outside of healthcare in the format and in the way it's happening currently.
Oh, yeah.
So some statistics, because I was able to find a few, and of course we'll list them on our website as we always do. The healthcare profession is hemorrhaging workers, with nearly 1 in 5 quitting since the beginning of the pandemic. And that's according to a recent report in The Atlantic. The industry has lost approximately 500,000 workers since February 2020, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. A Morning Consult survey noted 31% of the remaining healthcare workforce have considered leaving their current employer, while the other 66% of acute and critical care nurses have considered leaving the profession altogether. So, I mean, that's a lot to be said right there.
It really is.
It also noted that 35 and 54% of American nurses and physicians felt burnt out already, even before the pandemic started. They were overwhelmed by death, trauma, stress, which I guess you consider part of the standard job description if you're a physician or a nurse. But I think COVID-19 kind of put a magnifying glass on that. And it just took us all the way to burning candles at both ends, you know, like it was a whole.
Because not only were you seeing so much death, a lot of those nurses were dealing with that with a lack of PPE and being scared of what they were going to bring home to their families.
Yeah, I think in the beginning of it, you know, we were all, like this survey said, we were already burnt out or at the breaking point. And now it kind of pushed us over. We were all scrambling in the beginning. Nobody knew what to do. Us nurses, we didn't feel safe. We're like, what? You want us to wear this N95 for how many days? But this is supposed to be a one and done type of deal. You know, like
in your brown paper bag.
Yes. Like we were all feeling a certain kind of way, because I know I did.
Yeah.
And then the last statistic that I was able to find was that a lot of healthcare workers told The Atlantic that the final straw for leaving wasn't actually the COVID virus, but it was the dissatisfaction of how their institutions had responded to it, having to work with little say, like their voice or opinion didn't matter, and they were working under strenuous working conditions. Then we weren't being paid adequately. I know I didn't get any hazard pay for working during the pandemic. Did you get paid any?
No. I did get, and it was given last year as well, depending upon your hours worked, anywhere between a $250 and $1,000 bonus. It was considered like a COVID bonus for employees.
You're fortunate, because a lot of us didn't get it. Like I know I didn't get it.
if you think about $1,000 for working thousands of
You,
hours.
thank you. I was just about to say that you probably worked more than 1,000 hours. So
Yeah.
basically you got $1 for each hour that you worked. That's not enough. And then to me, that's not even hazard pay. But when you take all of that into, consideration, that's why a lot of them said, you know what, this is the last straw. I'm just going to go ahead and resign. So these people who were already on the fence, this pushed them over, and they basically said, you know what, I quit. I'm done.
Well, and I mean, I quite honestly do not blame them. I mean, that's just kind of one of those things where it's just,
I don't know. I
it's a slap in the face.
It is.
Essentially, it's what it is. I think you and I both, Rosa, did feel an obligation, and that really is the best word to use, to work even during the pandemic. And I know many other nurses that felt that they weren't doing enough. If they were in outpatient, that they weren't doing enough because they weren't working inpatient. And it was hard, I think. And I couldn't imagine being a new nurse during this time, because you go into nursing wanting to help people. Of course, the pay for what you have to deal with is not.
It's definitely not up to par.
It's not anywhere near where it should be. But you think through, like, okay, you have all these student loans you have to pay back, because nursing is not cheap. In medical, anything is not cheap. Books to learn, all that stuff is not cheap. And then, when you have other friends, family, people who don't work in healthcare, like, oh, what do you do? You're a nurse. Oh, what are you doing? And you tell them, I know when I worked outpatient, I was like, oh, I do this. And like, oh, well, are you doing this? Are you doing that? I'm like, well, no, that's more inpatient side. And then it was like, oh, well, are you picking up? I know the hospitals are doing this. And it was like, oh, well, why aren't you doing that? And it's like, well, do you work a second job? Have you decided to go and do any of this stuff? I mean, our local hospital will take anybody off the street and train them to be a sitter, essentially, and sit with patients that have dementia, to have an extra set of hands on deck. No, you're not. There's a lot more to it. And when you're doing even outpatient side, when you weren't directly in with COVID patients, I think other nurses that worked in the hospital that didn't do COVID felt bad for not helping in their way. And I think that
it's just this expectation.
Yes.
It's like, it's an expectation. And I don't know, who gave it to us. I'm not sure if I want it, because I'd like to give it back. But there's pressure from yourself, from your place of employment, just a sense of obligation of, this is what I should be doing. Whether, you worked hard and you, like you said, you go to school, you have these student loans and you have to pay them back. You don't want to, like waste a whole year
3
or
to 4 years or however long you get through school. Yeah.
And then have to sit there and look at this bill and be like, oh, I did all of this for what? For nothing. So like, it's this expectation that we put on ourselves and people put on us.
Oh, absolutely.
And I know, like for myself, most recently, I worked for an organization that was owned by a private equity firm whose bottom line was about the patients. It wasn't about the staff or the workers or any of them. Basically, you were just another number in line and you were replaceable. And, patients go through the system, not as patients, but literally I can see from their perspective where there's like little dollar signs, on each person's face. You know what I mean?
They try to say that they're for the patient, but they're really not. They're for the money that the patient brings in.
Exactly. So if you don't have any patients, then you don't have any revenue. And if you don't have any revenue, then, your expenses can't get paid. Even, I get it even from a corporation standpoint.
Right.
But it's more for them, like doing things to people, not necessarily about, not for them. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, you're providing a service to them. Not out of the goodness of your heart are you doing it for them. Us as nurses, we do that, yes.
Yes.
But the big corporation isn't. That's not That's not their goal
Mm,
out of all of this.
no.
Then your family is miserable because you're miserable, right? Because you're working this job in which, the corporation really doesn't care because you're replaceable. They really don't show any care or interest in your patient or your residents. They're just a bottom line, another number. Then you're miserable because your family's miserable. You can't be present with them. And when you're with them, you're thinking about work. And when you're at work, you're thinking about your family. So it's like this catch-22, and it's back and forth. And I can remember one year in particular where I was working so much overtime. And then I had said to myself, you know what, this is a lot. I can't keep doing this on top of having, a child with ASD who had appointments and this and that and the third. And I had cut back to part-time hours. And even at part-time hours, I was still, bringing home over 80 hours a week each paycheck.
Right.
And my husband sat down and he was like having conversation with me, and he was telling me, you know what, I'm just going to start putting a collage together. Collage of all the holidays and all the events and all the activities. And I'm going to put it together for you. And then I'm going to give it to you. And then at first I was like, oh, how sweet. And then he was like, no. He was like, it's going to be for the ones that you weren't there for, because you're working so freaking much that you're not here to attend to anybody's birthday, any of the holidays, any of the weekends, because you're consistently at work. So, there's like no work-life balance on top of all of this.
Your appreciation is donuts and coffee and pizza in the break room.
If somebody tells me pizza, we'll get you pizza one more time, I'm gonna tell them to eat the damn pizza themselves.
Like,
I'm over it.
I mean, and that's the thing is, I know my corporation, they did like a, December thoughtfulness thing. And one day for the whole office, they bought hot chocolate for everybody. I don't want to sound ungrateful because it was a nice gesture, but you go in and buying a pack of hot chocolate mix that I make in the Keurig and say, here's hot chocolate and a bag of marshmallows. Thank you so much for all that you do. And that's legitimately what they did.
It doesn't even quantify.
And it's like, well, it's nice to be appreciated, but I think they miss the picture when it comes to that. Like, I want you to appreciate me by making sure that I have adequate staff and that my coworkers are here and that we can take off if we need to take off, or if we're sick, we don't have to come in, we don't have to feel guilty. Like, there are so many other things that you could do. And I mean, I get that it's more expensive than a box of Starbucks hot chocolate, but
I feel like if you invest in your employees, there will be return in that investment.
Yeah, we know that. There's been studies. I mean, Harvard Business did a huge study on that, saying, hey, if you have happy employees, guess what? They start going above and beyond naturally. You don't have to ask them to. They create a great work environment. You have less turnover, which turnover is money. So you have all these things. I mean, they did a huge thing, but it's like people I don't want to hear that. So that's not the article that I want to read.
Absolutely. I feel that way too.
Yeah. And so that's where it gets a little bit. But I mean, here in Virginia, if we look at the Virginia Employment Commission, the number of people who have quit rose from 14,000 to 112,000 people.
That's a lot. When you think about it, it is a lot.
So we're back where we were in 2016. So we're literally going backwards. And then UVA Health said that the nurse turnover rate's now up to 13.6%. That's double what it should be.
And that's a very big, that's a very big, popular, accredited hospital. It's like one of our biggest.
Yeah.
According to the VEC, they say blue collar industries are keeping the economy afloat during the Great Resignation. So, I mean, on the other hand, the pandemic is pushing white collar jobs to change the way they work. So we all know what blue collar and white collar is, right? Blue collar is, for lack of a better word, the people who do most of the grunt work.
It's your workers, your actual workers.
Yeah, they're the ones using their
Physical
hands,
labor.
literally physical labor. And you have what they consider white collar, the people sitting behind the desks and working behind the computers and pushing paper.
Mm-hmm.
And, white collared workers were given, the opportunity this year and last year basically to kind of work from home. And a lot of them still are working from home, where it's kind of hard to do that being a blue collar worker. And in this case, I mean, nurses are
the
blue collar. Yeah, we are the blue collar workers.
Mm-hmm.
So experts say that improving pay and concern for mental health and, work from home options could help heal the workforce. The whole sorry, not sorry.
This is not
time.
New.
Yeah, this is not new. It's not new stuff. We need to get it together. You want your turnover to stop, and you need to actually invest in your people. You will see your return. Like Ashley said, there are several articles about it. I know I read at least one or two every single day. So do the research, do the math. It's there. Just like, they say, trust the science, trust the math, trust the science. The proof is in the pudding.
It really is, because what these resignations are doing is it is forcing employers to wake up. It's making them essentially redefine their workspace and be able to see what else can they offer people, not just money, but other benefits to actually help hold their employees.
I agree.
And I thought it was interesting when I was reading about the Great Resignation, and another thing I had seen, and it kind of sparked some interest. And Rosa, you had actually sent me this article, I believe at one time too, several months ago, about nurses and just the severe shortage, and one state's under a state of emergency because of their nursing shortage.
Yep. I remember that. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just, I'm doing the reading, and then I just was like, why is there such a shortage? There's like all these nursing programs. It's hard as hell to get in because they're always full. I mean, not everybody makes it through nursing school, and that number dwindles down. Like, I've been there, done that. We all have. But I'm like, is there really, like, what are the numbers? That's where I go. What are the numbers? Is there really a nursing shortage, or is there a growing list of nurses who are no longer willing to accept donuts and pizza, if they even get that, for part of their compensation as part of their benefit package?
How long have we been hearing about this nursing shortage? Like, I know when I was in nursing school, and I've been a nurse for almost 13, 14 years now. Like, I've been hearing since then about this huge nursing shortage. Mm-hmm. Do I think now it's finally catching up to, I think the bigger cities probably had seen it way before us. But now it's catching up to everywhere. And a lot of it is because of the pandemic. A lot of people said, like we mentioned before, I'm not putting up with this shit. See you later. Bye.
I'm old enough to retire. We're thinking about it anyways.
Keep your donuts.
So I did pull some numbers, and I will say it's hard to find LPN data, which was semi-frustrating. But I was able to find some stuff. And so did some numbers of the amount of nurses who took the NCLEX for the first time and passed. So for RNs, and this was in 2020, so last year, 177,407 nurses. So that's 177,407 new nurses on the street in 2020.
Yeah, like they can literally go anywhere right now and probably be hired legit on the spot like that.
Right. And that's RNs. And for LPNs that took the NCLEX, passed the first time, yada, 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 in 2020 was 46,221. Okay. And for the RNs, that included diploma, associate, and bachelor degree nurses. So all three of those wrapped into one. So I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty that's a pretty good chunk of nurses. I mean, you're looking 177,000 and then 46,000. You're
Yeah,
looking
that's
at
a hefty
over
chunk.
200,000 new
Yeah.
nurses. And I'm like, okay, well, I read another article in multiple places and went to like healthaffairs.org to see like what's the rate of like how many nurses retire every year. Well, for RNs, we know it's between 60 and 70,000 RNs retire each year. We're closer to the 60,000 side. They're expecting for 2021, 2022 to be closer to the 70,000 side. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. And I'm like, okay. And this is since 2012. It's been steady, 60 to
Yeah.
70,000 RNs are retiring. Couldn't find that exact number for LPNs,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just looking like, okay, well, 83 to 86% of nurses pass the NCLEX on the first time. Some people it takes more than once. I'm not sure, whatever. Like, I don't even care. If we look at the amount of people, nurses, that took more, like, oh, it took them more than once.
Yeah.
And we calculate all those numbers of nurses total, whether they took the NCLEX once or twice, yada, yada, yada. Well, then that number goes up to, and this is where I combined RNs and LPNs. We'll have the breakdown on our website, and the sheet, the table
Notes.
that we use for 2020. This is all available online. But for the RNs and LPNs, total 2020 new nurses, 313,951. That's over a 250,000 new nurses.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Where the hell are the nurses going? So if you have 60,000 or even say 70,000 RNs retiring every year, we'd have way more RNs than we have LPNs.
Well, we have way more that took the test.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean that they're working, which to me is kind of troublesome because here I am. I just told you how I felt and the reason why I kind of finished nursing, student loans, obligations, stress, social norm, blase this, blase that. So you're going to pay for what, 4 years, 2 to 4 years of college, student loans, grants, whatever. Now you've passed your NCLEX. Well, what have you been doing?
Right. Like where are these nurses at? Because even if we say high side, 70,000 RNs are retiring every year. And even if we say, fuck it, there's 30,000 LPNs retiring every year, which is that's incredibly high looking at the amount of nurses that are taking this NCLEX.
Well, but in that regard, yeah.
That's 100,000.
Well, where's the rest of the other?
Where's the other 213,000?
200 grand, yeah.
I mean, that is crazy. So this is where I don't understand, like, we should have a surplus of nurses. We should have plenty of nurses. Where are they at? I think that we don't have a shortage of nurses. I think we have a shortage of people that are willing to put up with crap anymore. And I think that's getting worse.
I used to think, and I know you've probably heard me say it a million times, I used to put a lot on millennials, but, it's not them. It's not some of them, yes, but all generations have, lazy people that don't want to work. Mm-hmm. And I think they did get like a very bad rap in the beginning about not wanting to work or feeling entitled or this, that, and the third. But then when I was going back and I was reading these articles and, looking at things, a lot of the articles said it didn't really have anything to do with like their laziness. What it had more to do with, them living more simply than my generation or the generation before me. And it also said that they were not working to live. Exactly. They're not lazy. They are living more simply. So it kind of gives them a freedom to pick and choose what they will tolerate in the workplace and what they won't, and where they will work and where they will not work. And it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me. because I was like, oh my God, that makes so much more sense. When
Mm-hmm.
you look at it generation wise, think about it. Baby boomers, what did they do? They worked in the same place for 20 years to pull a pension and a retirement check.
Well, and the thing
They
of it is a lot of those though, and this is what from what I've seen, they were rewarded for staying, for their seniority,
exactly.
for their time in.
Hmm.
I think now people could care less. Have you been there 10 years or if you've been there 2 months? They just like, whatever, I don't care. Like the HR department and the actual place where you're working are so separate now. Like HR doesn't care that this unit is working short. They're not working any faster.
No.
And I mean, I've dealt with that firsthand. We have a very, very small satellite offices where I'm at. And I say very small, I'm sure they're smaller, but we have 5 nurses total. 3 of them were out on FMLA all at the same time.
Crazy.
And we were told, you're fully staffed. You can't get any extra help. And we're like, yeah, but they're out on FMLA. They're like, yeah, but they're still employed. So you're still fully staffed. Sorry for your luck. We're like, okay, well, somebody bringing their nurse with them? Because we can't do the work. And we're at 2 separate locations. So it's not like you can help each other. Like you're kind of on your own.
Yeah. And that just goes back to the whole thing where you're just seeing like a number.
Mm-hmm.
So, my hats are off to the millennials and what's that new generation, Z
Oh,
generation?
you're asking the wrong one. I can't keep
Yeah,
up with all that.
like my hats are actually off to them. Because this year, that's probably one of the things that I have probably learned reading all these articles and trying to, my whole slogan for this year was debt free before 2023. And I'm
Yeah.
like 95% there. And I am so grateful to them
Mm-hmm.
because it does give you a totally different perspective
Oh,
of
absolutely.
what you will or will not tolerate and gives you a better option of where you want to work, what you want to work, how many hours you want to work, if you want to work for yourself or,
What you're willing to put up with.
exactly.
It absolutely does. And of course, I know I kind of went down a rabbit hole with the whole, is there a nursing shortage? But the article that I thought was interesting, and I've thought about it, not really in depth, but there was something from the Progressive, and I know there might be thoughts on articles from the Progressive, but I don't know. Rosa and I just tend to read a bunch of articles from everywhere. We form our own opinions. That's just how we roll.
Yeah.
But there were nurses at Saint Vincent Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts, that went on strike. Now, they've been on strike for months, like 8, 9 months, like a long time. And especially in my opinion. And
A long time.
yeah. And I'm like, okay, and I say ladies because nurses are predominantly female. I know that they're male nurses, don't come at me. They want fair wages and better nurse patient ratios. Like that's it.
Only
In
what
a
we've been
nutshell.
asking for since the dawn of time.
And I'm like, I mean, it sounds
Sounds
reasonable.
reasonable, right?
So
Sounds like a
why in the hell
reasonable
does it take
request.
8 months to come up with some sort of,
Deal.
I guess, deal is the best way to say
Yeah.
that? I'm like, really? 8 months? And then it's still a no-go because now they want to get rid of or not offer these nurses their jobs back because there's other nurses who have come in who are not doing the jobs and they just want to use them and not have these other people come back. So they thought they had actually got somewhere, and now they haven't, of course, because those nurses, I'm sure the union, because they're unionized, wants them to have their position back because, that's what the union does. So it made me think. I remember when I worked as a CNA, I was like 18, 19. I was young. And I went to this assisted living facility, and I remember interviewing with the owner. She was one of the owners. It was kind of like a small community, small assisted living place. And she actually wanted everybody to sign that they would not bring a union into that facility. You could not be part of the union if you work there. And I was just kind of like, well, I'm not part of the union. Don't plan on being part of the union. I'm not worried about it. So I signed it. I was like, whatever, I don't care. I worked there for 2 days. And I told them when I left on the second day that I wasn't coming back. They thought I was joking. No, it was awful. There were so many things that were bad. I could not even wrap my head around it. And it kind of brought like all this flashback. And I'm like, one, it's kind of sad that you even think that you'd have to have a separate organization be a spokesperson for nurses because of not having fair compensation and not working in safe environments.
It is a shame, seeing that that's your whole role. Like, as a nurse, that's your whole role, is safety.
Yeah.
Like, number one goal is people are supposed to get better safely and go home.
Yep. I wonder what other nurses' thoughts are on unions in the nursing field.
Well, here in the South, it's like a dirty word. You say the word union, and everybody's eyes get super big, and they're like, shh.
Yes. But my brother, who he's moved now, so it's a different, he's no longer working for them, but he worked for an electrical company. He's a lineman, and he was part of a union. And I'm going to tell you, he had a hell of a lot more benefits than I'll ever think about having. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, well, maybe that union thing is not necessarily a bad idea. But then some people are like, oh no, unions are awful. I mean, it's either way.
You got to pay that.
You have dues you have to pay. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, if they're getting me twice my paycheck, I mean, I'll give you $25 a month or however much your union dues are.
That's definitely food for thought.
So it's interesting that we even have to have something like a union to make sure that workers are being fairly compensated and treating well. That's just ridiculous. I mean, we're in America, where that shouldn't even happen. But obviously, there's a disconnect within nurses, within ourselves, as to what our worth is. And it's taken me a long time to get to that place. Rosa, you know that probably better than anybody. But honey, now that I am here, I'm going to tell you what, it has opened up a whole new world. Because
these last 2 years.
You want me to have, more responsibility? You want me to do this stuff? Yeah. So what's the pay change going to be to take on these additional responsibilities and these additional things? No, I'm not working from home. Not doing that. Not working off the clock. If you want me to work, I'm happy to work. You're going to pay me for it. Because I
don't believe in working for free. That's called volunteering.
Yeah.
And I know you and probably a lot of other people that have worked with me have heard me say if I wanted to volunteer, I'd be a candy striper at the hospital. But that's not where I'm at this point in my life. Never to say that I won't ever, because there are other things I volunteer to do. However, it's
I'm gonna
not
be feeding the hungry today. I'm not going to be.
It's to provide for my family right now. And so like anything extra or above, you should be fairly compensated.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm like, no, we're not going to keep adding. We don't add. Like, I have my job, I have my job duties, I do my job, I do it pretty well. Not doing that. So I'm curious as to why we can't, as nurses, get on the same page, because if we as nurses all say, something, we're not doing this anymore. There are a hell of a lot more of us than there are hospital administrators.
I can tell you there's a hell of a lot more of us than there are doctors.
I mean, think about this. There's power in numbers. It's just getting everybody on the same page. And that's where I think that's what ultimately is going to have to happen. And maybe that's going to take a union. Maybe that's what we're going to see. And that's how we're going to get into the better spot. I don't know. But I am curious, especially I'd love to talk to a nurse that actually, or get feedback from a
lot of these that are on strike.
Or either that deal with a union and what their experience has been with and without one.
That would be interesting. You can find our references on our website, thenursingpostpodcast.com, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Please leave your thoughts and comments. Thanks again for listening to The Nursing Post.